Some of the individuals involved in the recent Minnesota fraud scandal were U.S. citizens of Somali descent, but there were also some Somali nationals who were not U.S. citizens. To date, the U.S. Department of Justice has charged 98 defendants in the Minnesota fraud-related cases, 85 of whom are of Somali descent. So 98 have been charged, 85 are of Somali descent. 64 have been convicted. The Department of Justice has also issued more than 1,750 subpoenas, executed more than 130 search warrants, and conducted more than 1,000 witness interviews. Sadly, as soon as the magnitude of the fraud was identified and amplified by an independent investigator, following an appropriate surge of DHS immigration resources into Minnesota, the mainstream media and the radical left immediately began to call the U.S. government's actions racist, claiming that the Trump administration was unlawfully targeting Somali nationals. Not surprisingly, the ACLU rushed out to sue the Trump administration for simply enforcing the immigration laws as written. But fraud is fraud.
Why is the government putting these highly vetted refugees in shackles, transporting them thousands of miles from home, and interviewing them in detention? We only have to look to the president's own words. He has repeatedly made bigoted and racist attacks on Somali immigrants, calling them, quote, garbage, close quote. He has said repeatedly he doesn't want immigrants from, I'm not going to use the word that he used, S-hole countries. How do I know he said that? I was sitting in the Oval Office with him when he said it. The racist attacks have not stopped with immigrants. Just last week, Trump posted a disgusting racist image of former President Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle. They are my personal friends.
When the news broke about the level of child care service fraud by Somali nationals in Minnesota, the American people were rightly shocked and outraged. The loss to the federal government, meaning the loss to American taxpayers, is estimated to be at $9 billion or more. That estimate only covers what the U.S. government has discovered in one state, the state of Minnesota. There are also credible allegations that the Minnesota government knew about the fraud as early as 2011, and that Governor Walz and Mayor Frey not only were aware of the fraud as early as 2018 or 2019, but did nothing to stop it. Some of the individuals involved in the recent Minnesota fraud scandal were U.S. citizens of Somali descent, but there were also some Somali nationals who were not U.S. citizens. To date, the U.S. Department of Justice has charged 98 defendants in the Minnesota fraud-related cases, 85 of whom are of Somali descent. So 98 have been charged, 85 are of Somali descent. 64 have been convicted. The Department of Justice has also issued more than 1,750 subpoenas, executed more than 130 search warrants, and conducted more than 1,000 witness interviews. Sadly, as soon as the magnitude of the fraud was identified and amplified by an independent investigator, following an appropriate surge of DHS immigration resources into Minnesota, the mainstream media and the radical left immediately began to call the U.S. government's actions racist, claiming that the Trump administration was unlawfully targeting Somali nationals. Not surprisingly, the ACLU rushed out to sue the Trump administration for simply enforcing the immigration laws as written. But fraud is fraud, and this recent episode, unfortunately, appears to be just the tip of the iceberg. I expect to hear more as the Department of Justice continues its investigations into fraud, not only in Minnesota, but also in states like California. Recently, the Government Accountability Office estimated that the federal government loses between $233 billion and $521 billion annually due to fraud and improper payments. Let me say that again. $233 billion to $521 billion is lost every year due to fraud and improper payments of federal benefits and other public funds. Our national debt has surpassed $38 trillion and continues to climb. If the United States could recoup these hundreds of billions of dollars lost to fraud every year, we might actually have some hope of getting our fiscal situation on a sustainable trajectory. I imagine that the 1 in 4 American households who live paycheck to paycheck would love to have even a fraction of that money to pay down their bills, to buy groceries, and even treat their family to a dinner or a movie. Now, eliminating fraud is more than just a matter of fiscal solvency. It also directly affects the safety and security of American citizens. Much of the fraud is committed by aliens, many of them criminal aliens, and we don't know what they're doing with those stolen funds. In 2023, the Federation of American Immigration Reform, or FAIR, estimated that Medicaid lost approximately $8 billion in funding annually due to fraud attributable to illegal aliens. Similarly, FAIR estimated that the illegal aliens have obtained more than $3 billion in earned income tax credits, with the average filer receiving more than $4,000. Over the last 2 years, $700 million in cash, largely tied to Somali couriers, has been flown out of the Minneapolis airport via suitcase, according to DHS officials. DHS officials say this cash transfer has been occurring for close to a decade, but the practice has increased in recent years. There are two major problems with this type of large cash transfer. First, we don't know whether the source of this cash is from any federal, state, or local benefit program. And second, the money could be used to fund Somali terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab. Taking cash out of the country is not necessarily illegal. Any individual departing the country with more than $10,000 in cash must file a customs declaration form about the amount of cash before they take off. The Somali couriers are, in fact, legally declaring the cash they're taking out of the country, ironically. From a fraud and national security perspective, the current customs form is not expansive enough to disclose the source of the cash these couriers are taking out of the country or the ultimate recipient of the cash. Later this week, I plan to introduce a bill to address this issue. This bill, called the Stop Somali Currency Airport Smuggling Through Hawala's Cash Fraud Act, or Stop Somali Cash Fraud Act, will strengthen the customs form for non-citizens only who are taking more than $10,000 in cash out of the country. This bill will require disclosure of whether the cash is from any federal, state, or local government contract or benefit, additional background information on the individual transporting the cash, and additional background information on the ultimate recipient of the cash. Most importantly, it will require filing the customs form 72 hours in advance, which will give Customs and Border Protection more time to fully vet the form before allowing non-citizens to leave the country with suitcases full of cash. In addition to those smuggling money out of the country to potentially supporting terrorists, those who commit fraud while staying in the country also pose a threat. President Trump's team at the White House has uncovered numerous examples of illegal aliens arrested for crimes who've also been receiving Medicaid. These individuals have been arrested for a variety of crimes, ranging from child abuse to domestic battery to burglary to murder. During deliberations for the working family tax cuts, which strengthened guardrails against illegal aliens receiving Medicaid, Democrats repeatedly assured Republicans that illegal aliens are already ineligible for Medicaid and that we are simply barking up the wrong tree. But I'm grateful to President Trump and his team for showing the American people the truth about what is actually happening. Fraud takes many different forms, but the harm to Americans is real and can even have life-threatening consequences. A quick internet search will reveal numerous instances of foreign nationals who've been convicted for fraud, everything from wire fraud, manufacturing and selling counterfeit documents, fraudulently obtaining mass numbers of H-2B visas, and much more. None of these crimes are victimless. Consider the damage done to countless U.S. citizens whose identities are stolen. According to one report, over $19 billion is lost to identity theft annually. And many of the individuals who've been defrauded have to spend their own hard-earned money and countless hours and headaches to fix a mess that came about through no fault of their own. Which brings me to another point. I'd like to remind the public of something that's hardly ever reported on by the mainstream media. Too often we hear that ICE and CBP are arresting people who supposedly have no criminal record. But the fact that an alien has no criminal record, that is, has never been arrested, charged, or convicted, doesn't mean that this individual has not broken the law. Consider what it takes an illegal alien to continue living in the United States, not to mention the fact that entering the country without authorization is a crime. To work, an illegal alien has to obtain some sort of identity document. In many instances, the identity documents are fraudulent or altered documents of real U.S. citizens, and the alien has assumed that person's identity. Stealing a U.S. citizen's identity or Social Security number is a crime, but that isn't where the criminal activity stops. Once an alien has acquired a false identification, how would this person commute to work every day? Often by driving without a license, also a crime in most jurisdictions, or driving without insurance, also likely a crime. Whether someone entered the country illegally or overstayed a visa, there are certainly crimes that all aliens have committed against our immigration laws, even though they may not have yet been caught and the offenses may seem minor. But make no mistake, criminal aliens not only prey on unsuspecting U.S. citizens, but they also prey on their own people, stealing the identities of other aliens lawfully in the United States to stay in the United States, work illegally, or in some instances, just defraud the U.S. government. So what can we do about it? What can Congress, what can the government do about it? First, we can begin by prioritizing thoroughness of security vetting rather than speed and efficiency like the Biden administration did, as they waved hundreds of thousands, even millions of people into the country during the 4 years of the Biden administration without adequate vetting. We can invest in fraud prevention and detection mechanisms that will allow federal, state, and local government agencies to quickly identify those who are attempting to fraud. We can also require agencies to require biometric identification and verify each alien's identity before they may be granted any federal, state, or local public benefit, loan, or grant. Furthermore, we can require automated and recurrent identity verification, random audits, and in-person identity verification for all federal and state programs that provide funds for public services or programs. Finally, one thing I find surprising is that the American citizens in blue and red states are not demanding more accountability for the millions of Americans who've been defrauded. It seems that they are more interested in going out on the street to actively protest against federal law enforcement officers who are not only doing the job they've been sworn to do, but enforcing the laws Congress has passed. It is our responsibility as the U.S. government to protect the American people. It's also our duty to protect the American people and preserve the integrity of our republic. If we fail in those duties, we won't have a country any longer.
In the troubling first weeks of this year, federal immigration agents shot and killed 2 of our fellow Americans in Minneapolis. These killings followed other instances of brutal violence and arrests in Minneapolis, Chicago, and cities around our country. Under the Trump administration, we've seen an unprecedented number of deaths in federal immigration detention, one of which was recently ruled a homicide. Desperate families are waiting for answers to many others. These are the devastating impacts of this administration's reckless, aggressive, mass deportation campaign. As members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, it's our responsibility, committee and legal responsibility, to conduct much-needed oversight of the Trump administration and to have a reasoned, bipartisan discussion on how to stop these abuses of power and fix the broken immigration system. Instead, we're having our second hearing in 2 weeks, demonizing an entire community based on a few individuals' misconduct. Quite simply, the Republicans on this committee are working overtime for the Trump administration's attacks on lawfully admitted refugees. This administration shot down refugee admissions on day one, except for white Afrikaners. They've justified this decision based on alleged fraud. To be clear, under the Biden administration, refugees went through multi-layered, rigorous vetting processes considered the gold standard of vetting. In contrast, under this administration, from the comfort of their homes in South Africa, Afrikaners can apply for a refugee program using a Google form. This processing takes less than a month in South Africa, and it shows. Consider one recently arrived Afrikaner refugee. He made disgusting anti-Semitic posts in 2023 before he was admitted to this country as a refugee. Yet he was approved in record time by this administration, even as the administration claims it will revoke visas for, quote, anti-Semitic activity. At the same time, this administration is rounding up lawfully admitted refugees. In recent weeks, immigration agents have arrested over 100 refugees with no criminal record in Minnesota and flew them to detention centers in Texas for, quote, interviews, close quote. Some were released in the middle of the night, thousands of miles from home. They had no idea where they were. They were not even given paperwork or identification. These individuals had immigrated the right way to the United States. Many waited for years in refugee camps overseas. They underwent extensive vetting by the Department of Homeland Security and other federal agencies. They arrived on flights coordinated by the U.S. government. It is wrong to treat these refugees like they're fraudsters. So why is the government putting these highly vetted refugees in shackles, transporting them thousands of miles from home, and interviewing them in detention? We only have to look to the president's own words. He has repeatedly made bigoted and racist attacks on Somali immigrants, calling them, quote, garbage, close quote. He has said repeatedly he doesn't want immigrants from, I'm not going to use the word that he used, S-hole countries. How do I know he said that? I was sitting in the Oval Office with him when he said it. The racist attacks have not stopped with immigrants. Just last week, Trump posted a disgusting racist image of former President Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle. They are my personal friends. Barack was my colleague. I was the first senator to endorse him for president. I resent what President Trump created an image that was so demeaning to this man and his wife. His staff took the image down, but he refuses to apologize. The words "I'm sorry" are not in the president's vocabulary. This racism should have no place in our society or in our immigration system, and it should have no place in this committee. Let's be clear. Fraud is a crime and it should be prosecuted. I will remind everyone that it was the Biden Justice Department that opened the Minnesota fraud investigation and brought the first prosecution. And it is the Trump Justice Department that has diverted prosecutors and FBI agents away from fraud investigations to focus on the president's mass deportation campaign. Refugees are some of the most vulnerable and most vetted individuals in the United States. We can target fraud without shackling and detaining them in the dead of night. It is time we reject these racist attacks and restore order and humanity in our immigration system.